Welcome to Central Global News Podcast. This week, in a special episode for International Women's Day, we will talk about worldwide protests and movements for women's rights and discuss how the coronavirus pandemic affects gender inequality. The 8th of March is International Women's Day, and many protests and events were held for this occasion in countries all around the world, including Indonesia, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Spain, and Israel. In France, women's rights activists organized several protests against sexism and sexual abuse. Domestic violence cases increased in the country during the pandemic by 40% during the first lockdown and by 60% during the second one, according to French authorities. Other countries have shown similar tendencies. In Pakistan, activists are planning a march despite the risk of spreading coronavirus. The people attending are asked to wear a mask and write a political slogan on it. Online activists are using the hashtag #Patriarchy'sPandemic to mobilize women in Pakistan. This year's rally has an increased focus on health issues because of the pandemic. The manifesto written by the organizers calls on the government to increase the health budget, implement a COVID-19 plan for women and minorities, and tackle issues like violence against women and gender inequality in the labor market. They are also demanding universal access to contraception and a fairer COVID-19 vaccine rollout. Pakistan is one of the few countries that allowed private companies to import vaccines without price caps, which resulted in social inequalities in the access to COVID vaccination. In Nepal, a rally was held demanding tax-free sanitary pads. Period poverty, which is defined as having little to no access to menstrual products, menstrual hygiene, education, and sanitary facilities, has also been negatively affected worldwide by the COVID pandemic. Although, on average, women menstruate for what amounts to 7 years of their lives, many struggle to afford menstrual products and have no adequate access to toilets or clean water. Globally, approximately 1 in 10 women cannot afford the necessary sanitary materials, and because of this, 12% of women have to use often unsafe and unhygienic objects. Without access to sanitary products and toilets, women and children are forced to miss school and work, and poor menstrual hygiene can also cause reproductive and urinary tract infections. Before the pandemic, approximately 500 million women were affected by period poverty monthly. In a survey conducted by the global charity Plan International, 73% of health professionals in 30 countries said COVID-19 reduced access to products through shortages or disrupted supply chains. The closing of stores and public transportation during quarantine and lockdown also made access to menstrual products even less available. Financial struggles caused by coronavirus contribute to period poverty as well. COVID had more serious effects on women from an economical point of view as well. Women lost more income and left the labor market at a greater rate than men, and they also tend to take on a greater share of unpaid work. Jobs predominantly done by women are generally lower paid and tend to be in sectors like care work and hospitality, which were significantly affected by lockdowns and COVID measurements. Ahead of International Women's Day, the United Nations Development Programme have released a new report addressing gender inequality. The organization calls for temporary basic income to provide financial security and help the world's poorest women cope with the effects of the pandemic. Temporary basic income for women could narrow the gender gap and lead to women having more economic independence. Thank you for listening to the podcast. We'll be back next week.